Hello and welcome to Choose FI. Today on the show, we have our good friends, Stephen and Lauren Keys, back on the podcast after 4 years. And man, is their story incredibly interesting. They have curated and built a life that they truly wanted to live into. And I love their concept of how money can really provide choices and enable them to feel free enough to make drastic changes in their lives in every sense, from the prototypical FU money story to long-term travel to a mini unretirement. You're really going to enjoy this episode. And with that, welcome to Choose FI. Lauren and Stephen, welcome back to Choose FI. It's good to see you both.
Hey, good to see you.
Good to see you.
Yeah, this should be fun. So, okay, we referred to the first time you were on, which was episode 226. So we called it Trip of a Lifestyle to All U.S. National Parks. So yeah, you've built this really cool brand, Trip of a Lifestyle, and your long-term travel didn't stop with all 60 plus national parks, right? So since the last time we've spoken to you, as I understand it, you took 3 months in Australia and I'm sure a whole handful of other cool trips. I think we'll kind of double back to this, but tell me about Australia. I want to hear a couple of minutes. Like, how on earth did you guys pull off a 3-month trip?
Yeah, Australia was super fun. The plane ride to get there, a little less so. It's quite long. I think it's like 10 hours just to get from Florida to Hawaii, which is halfway, and then like another 10 hours from like Hawaii to Sydney. So that was really long, but it was worth it. We were there for 3 months. We traversed the entire continent. We went from one coast to the other, true trip of a lifestyle fashion in a hatchback, and it was awesome.
Yeah, we bought a car when we got there. I think it was $2,800 US dollars, if I remember correctly. And we ended up driving it all the way across Australia and back and selling it for more than we paid for it at the end.
That's amazing. I remember your story from Hawaii, where I think you did something similar, right? You were there for 6 months or thereabouts and bought a car. And I think the people who you bought it from looked at you like you were crazy because you laid down in the back to see essentially if you could sleep in it. So hatchback, did you actually sleep in this car?
That was actually our camper van that we laid down in the back and we were checking it out. But we did not have to lay down in the back of the hatchback. We were mostly in hotels, which were surprisingly affordable in Australia compared to the US.
Interesting.
Yeah, I mean, it was pretty inexpensive right off the bat, but we also, in the larger population areas, got to use a lot of hotel points, and the redemption values on those were also like super low compared to US ones that, like, in comparable large cities, you wouldn't get that kind of a rate for points. So that was pretty nice too. We stayed at like a super nice in Paradise or whatever in Queensland.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that one was really
nice.
Yeah,
we got some pretty solid credit card point redemptions, and really the rest of the hotels were very affordable there, much less than here in the US.
That's great. Yeah, I was going to ask, because you guys are, I feel like, just loaded with actionable tips. Were there any travel reward secrets for the flights to Australia? I feel like that's like a really aspirational trip for a lot of people. Lauren, you look like you're jumping out of your seat.
Yeah, so I actually booked them all as like separate legs, because booking one nonstop, or not nonstop, but like one full leg from Florida to Sydney, Australia was like double the price of booking just to Hawaii and then from Hawaii to Sydney. So that was my big hack. I just used Google Flights and I just plugged in different dates and different start and ending locations and was able to find, I think our flight, oh man, I'm not going to remember the numbers. Do you remember the numbers for the flights?
I don't remember how much it cost.
We have like a whole article that has like the specific numbers, but it was it was half price for us to fly all the way to Australia.
That's fantastic. So yeah, definitely send me that link. We'll put it in the show notes. But just real quick, again, because these actionable tips, did you use rewards points or was this a Google Flights to pay cash for it?
We just paid cash for the flights. I found that was actually cheaper, but we did use hotel points for some of the larger cities in Australia that we stayed in.
And as part of the Google Flights search, so I feel like a lot of people understand Google Flights, but it's still a black box to some people. So did you stay in Hawaii as part of it to make it cheaper? Was that an aspect to this?
Yes, we did one overnight in Hawaii. So like, I think we came in, because from Florida, you're flying like back in time basically to Hawaii. So we got into Hawaii like early evening, spent the night, woke up super early the next day, and then flew out, I want to say at like 8 a.m. So we had like a shuttle from the hotel to the airport. and yeah, hopped on a flight and flew for another 10 hours, crossed the date line and landed in Sydney.
But the general strategy for someone who would want to repeat this like flight hack would be to look for the connection points that are most commonly chosen automatically when you do a full flight booking, like the easy way, we'll call it, and then manually try booking one-way flights yourself from your location to those different midpoints, and then from those midpoints to your final destination. And you'll often find that you can save as much as 50% by just manually doing it that way. And sometimes, yeah, it requires you to stay a night, or if you want to, stay a week or 2 weeks in the, midway journey. Hawaii is not a bad place to take a vacation. So that's not necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah, I forgot to mention, like, the reason it was Hawaii is because when I was looking for flights from Florida to Australia, it was constantly connecting in Hawaii. Like, it kept having a connection there in Hawaii. And then I was looking at, like, even the other direction. So from Florida, we were going Florida to Sydney, which was going over the Pacific. But I know there's other flights that go from Florida to Perth, which is on the other side of Australia. And you'd fly, like, over Africa or whatever, or like through. And none of the cheaper flights went that direction. So that's why we ended up going the Hawaii route.
That is very cool. Okay. I said we wouldn't get bogged down in the travel. And of course, I got bogged down because it's so interesting. So that is a cool little tip. So it sounds like you actually booked 2 separate flights in that regard and look for that connection point. Okay. That is really cool. That's going to help a lot of people. So let's take 75 steps back and go to the 35,000 foot view. So from chatting with you guys, it seems like the operating principle of your life is basically to make choices where money can be less of a factor in your life. And Lauren, before we hit record, you basically waxed poetically about this, and I was kicking myself that we didn't record it. I love to hear you give an overview of this because I think this really is so important. And like I said in the intro, it is the through line for essentially everything that you guys have done over the last decade, essentially.
Yeah, so I think when people find out about financial independence, like the first thing that you do is you figure out your FI number, right? Your 25x your expenses number, what you need to be fully financially independent. And, we did the same process. We set this goal and we chipped away at it, checking our net worth every month, seeing our progress. But I think for a lot of people, it's easy to get kind of focused on this goal, whether you're laser focused, head down, grinding it out until you reach it, or it's, this really far away goal that you'll hit, eventually as you get to retirement age. And for us, I felt like every dollar that we saved was bringing us closer to more choices. That money represented other things that we could buy in our life, typically time and freedom. And we did that. I mean, 2-3-ish years after we started tracking our net worth was when we went to Hawaii for 6 months. And
we only had a net worth of about $150,000 at that time, but our expenses were so low that $150,000 would have bought us like 7 years off work if we wanted it. So to take 6 months off just didn't feel like a big deal anymore. And you do gain incremental freedom as you go, and it's okay to enjoy it along the way.
Yeah, that's definitely like the biggest difference, I would say, in our approach is just using that money for what it's worth, which is providing you those options, that freedom to leave, a toxic workplace, to negotiate a higher rate of pay or less hours, to, take a gap year with your family or take the summer to travel with your kids. Like there's so many things that money that you're saving can do for you. And every time that we've traveled, in fact, we haven't even had to chip away at those savings. They just provided the confidence, I guess. They gave us the courage to take those, risks, but it ended up never actually being too risky for us.
Yeah, so like when we did that 6-month Hawaii trip and we had $150,000, we actually came back home with just a little bit more than $150,000. And in fact, all of the multi-month trips that we've taken to date, knock on wood, we've come home richer from each and every one of those than we set out with. So you go into it thinking like, well, I got plenty of savings. It wouldn't be a big deal to spend this on something that's important to me. But if you actually are pretty strategic about it and you're willing to do maybe a little bit of just like part-time freelance work or rent out your house or rely on your investments or any number of other things and keep your expenses low, you can actually get richer while you're on vacation. And we've done that like 6 or 7 times now.
Yeah, I love that. So, right. I guess what you're saying is after netting everything out. So the increase in your net worth and then factoring in any spending, but it seems like some of that is offset by, like you said, part-time freelancing or potentially renting out a house, that when you're netting it, it's coming out positive. So you're having this extraordinary life experience that most people, frankly, don't think they can do because it would be too expensive, right? I think that's the reflexive answer to, oh, a 6-month trip to Hawaii or a 3-month trip all around Australia. People would think that's a $50,000 to $100,000 trip. And just from what I'm gleaning here, it sounds like it's a tiny, tiny little fraction of that. And yeah, it's just such a neat way to think about it. But I guess, again, one more step back is, how did you get the courage to do that the first time? So you have that $150,000 net worth, which at the time was about 7 years of your annual expenses because you guys kind of ran lean and mean. But nevertheless, it's not that easy to pick up and move to Hawaii for 6 months. Like, where do you get the courage to do that?
Really, I do think the answer is very simply the money and the knowledge that the only thing stopping most people from doing something like that is money, if you really think about it. Barring some other unforeseen life circumstances, for most people, it's money. And if you do just kind of grind out the saving for a few years, right, you're going to start to feel really free for the rest of your life. And that doesn't just have to come after you hit full financial independence.
Yeah, that's so critical, right? This is truly a continuum where I think every step closer to FI, you accrue more power. But like you're saying, it can start really towards the beginning of this journey. That's the beautiful part. I know from our first episode, 226, I think you saved somewhere in the vicinity of $100,000 in the first 2 and change years. So, I mean, you weren't like grizzled veterans of the FI community at this point. You were 25-year-old, just out of college students, essentially. I mean, that's really wild. And so, Stephen, you said the money is ultimately what holds people back. And I think that unquestionably is true. I think brass tacks, that is what's holding people back. But the psychology is hard also, right? For a lot of people, they're entrenched in their lives. They feel like, oh, how could I leave my job? What's going to be there when I come back? How can I actually do this? Was that ever a concern for you? And I'm sure others have asked you that question before. So, like, how do you advise someone if it wasn't a concern for you?
Actually, now that you bring it up, I kind of remember at that time, people were concerned for us. I think we were less concerned, and we did get a little bit of pushback from a couple of family members and also some random strangers on the internet that I happened to be chatting with about this stuff in the financial independence community, who were like, how are you going to get a job when you get back? You're going to have this huge hole in your resume, and, your former employer is not going to want to see you again. So how are you going to deal with that? And our answer was just like, dude, we have 7 years of expenses to save. How long does it take to get a job? If it took a few months of searching, which would be like a bad scenario, that'd be fine. It's not a big deal. So again, really, it points back to that money.
Yeah, it definitely does. And right, the hole in your resume, or what is the boss going to think? I think this is what normal people think, right? And like that sounds a little worse than I
We'll
intended,
take
but
it.
Yeah.
but right, like this is the power of FU money. And I,
Yeah.
I think you guys have used that really to a great effect. Lauren, I'd love to hear how has FU money impacted like your life, your and Stephen's lives in terms of dealing with your employers or bosses, however you want to look at it.
So that first trip when we went to Hawaii, I was working for a small financial company doing their marketing. And when we were going to leave, I just told them, I went to my boss and I was like, hey, I know that I'm like a one person department. And I told them, I think I told them at least 6 months in advance, just because I knew like how many hats I wore, that they were going to need the time to find someone. I'm like, I'm happy to help train a replacement. I'd also be happy to continue doing some of this work remotely. I know that much of what I do can be done remotely. And a lot of the stuff that's in person, I mean, you have staff for anyway. So, if you'd like, I'd be happy to make it work. It's a 6-hour time difference in Hawaii, but I'll wake up and be available some days during, working hours or whatever you need. Happy to do it. Otherwise, I'm thankful for my time here. And so I was just very respectful about it. You could posture into like a position of strength, but I didn't need to. And I was able to just talk about it very openly. And well, I was just nice about it. And I was like, I'm happy to to do whatever you need me to do, but this is what's happening. I wasn't asking. And we actually did end up negotiating. I worked probably 10 hours a week for them while we were in Hawaii. And then when we got back from Hawaii, we moved to a different part of Florida. And so I didn't end up going back full time with them, although I think they were probably holding my position to some extent, hoping that I would be back. But I was like, we're not coming back to Orlando, sorry. And then because, again, of our savings, when I was looking for a job, I was able to look for a better job in terms of pay. So I think I was making 35-ish there. And when we moved back from Hawaii, my first job offer was for 35. And I was like, man, I really want to level up this time around. Steven was like, well, just don't accept it and keep looking. And so I think I continued the job search another month and was able to secure a $50,000 a year offer just by waiting a little bit longer and interviewing in a few more places. It's because, again, that buffer of money that we had saved.
Yeah, it's amazing the add-on benefits of pursuing FI, right? You keep finding them. And I think this is what a lot of us realize as we get into this. Lauren, you said something like posture a position of strength. And I know what you meant, obviously, of like trying to, in essence, overplay your hand, I think is what you're saying. But you don't have to. That's the beautiful thing. You didn't need to. It exudes from you when you have the strength, right? When that power dynamic is different. And again, you're not lording it over them.
Absolutely.
Not at all, right? You're just going in there and saying, look, this truly is how it is. I'm going to leave. Or here's another interesting alternative for you to consider.
The irony is that people warned us about this resume gap. And as Lauren mentioned, we actually both came home from that trip and bumped up our salaries significantly at our next job. So that turned out to be the complete opposite of true. And job hopping can really help you accelerate the growth in your wages, especially early on.
Yeah, and we've certainly seen that in some episodes on negotiating salary and how really, unfortunately, hopping to different jobs does make a difference. And yeah, Lauren, to go from 35K to 50K, that's a massive percentage increase, obviously. And not for nothing, Stephen, but that hole in the resume, quote unquote, it actually makes you more interesting, right? To talk about, hey, these are the things we're up to. I suspect, again, netting out. If you're netting out maybe the slight negative of this hole in the resume, which I don't think either of us would argue it's really a negative, with the positive of, oh, wow, we just spent 6 months in Hawaii. I think that nets to the good in terms of when you go for that chat to sit down for that next job. I think people want to talk to you in that regard, right?
Yeah, I think it was something interesting to talk about at the very least. I don't know if it helped us get another job, but
sure.
it was at least something. It gets us on podcasts, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I think as long as you position it into something that is either interesting on its own or useful for them. So we also did a lot of photography while we were there, which is something that we can point to and say oh yeah, we worked on our, on the skill set of creative photography. And it really allowed us to get back in touch with that, part of ourselves. I think that points to, skills that whether or not it's necessary for that job shows that you're a more well-rounded person. So there's that too, right? It doesn't have to be skill to skill matching so much as, yeah, it's interesting. And I am better for it. I wasn't just sitting on a beach, lounging and waiting until I can do it again. That's the other thing that I think they'd want to know is, well, I'm here now to work for you and I'm going to apply these skills and, it'll be a few years at least until my next big trip.
Yeah, I love that. And just as an aside to the audience, your Instagram is fantastic. So it's instagram.com/trip of a lifestyle. And you talk about being photographers. It just kind of exudes from the pictures. It's pretty clear that you pay great attention to that. So well done. Bravo on that for sure.
Really appreciate
Thanks so
much.
And just going back real quick, Lauren, to when you come back, you get that first job offer for 35K. But again, it's the benefits and those add-on benefits of FI is you could wait and you could be flexible and you could try to find that job that you actually want, either A, wanted, even at a 35K salary, or B, in your case, hey, I really want to level up. And I mean, to go from 35 to 50 is extraordinary. And again, these are the little benefits of FI that I see, but you clearly would not have been able to do that with a $0 net worth, right? Hard stop, end of story.
Yeah, and going back to the thing about quitting your job, one of the things we always like to tell people is never quit your job, or at least never just quit your job. So if you kind of think about what Lauren said there, she knew that she was going to go away for 6 months. It wasn't like she was asking permission to do that, right? But she didn't just walk into her boss's office and say, I quit, goodbye, I have FU money, so therefore I get to go for 6 months, right? It was, hey, I'm going to be gone for 6 months. Here are some options that are available to you. I could work part-time for you. I could just go. You could hold the position for when I get back. Like, I don't know. We can talk about it, right? Just have a conversation. And so we actually repeated that. I couldn't do that at that time in our lives because I was a public school teacher. So there's basically zero flexibility in that job, unfortunately. But at my next job, when we went to that trip to all 63 national parks, I did the exact same thing, the Lauren strategy. We actually both repeated that strategy again. And so this time I got the good result. I got an employer who said, yeah, we don't want to lose you. So you can do some part-time work from on the road and your full-time job will be available when you get back if you want it. In that case, Lauren tried the same thing. It didn't work out as well for her. They offered her something, but the part-time work pay rate was significantly reduced, so it wasn't very attractive to her. So she just kindly said no, and she quit anyway. We still took our 7-month vacation, and then I had some part-time work this time. So when you think about quitting your job and you think about exercising that FU money, don't just do it like a hard stop, right? Give your employer some options that are palatable to you, and maybe even throw one option out there that's like really exactly what you want. And you might be surprised the percentage of the time that they take it. It's not going to work every time, but it works more often than you'd think.
And I will add, it's important that you be a good employee. Like, you need to have some serious value, I would say. But it's funny because, like, anytime we talk to, like, we have a lot of younger cousins and siblings and stuff, and the things we tell them, it's like so straightforward and easy, like showing up on time and doing what you say you're going to do. And like the things that you think are expected, like surprisingly not everyone is capable of doing. And so just being good, being a good employee and being good at your job, like allows you to be in this position to negotiate in the first place. Like, yes, having the money and being a good employee allows you to have that really honest and open conversation with your employer. They're not going to care as much to keep you around if you're not like worth it, right? So that matters too, I will say.
This doesn't work if you suck at your job.
Right.
If they're thrilled that you're leaving, it doesn't work.
Right. It doesn't work that way.
But Lauren, it's funny that you bring that up about just like the basics, because I was literally going through all of my old 5-weekly newsletters like in the last couple of days to try to highlight segments that I could reuse, in essence, things that are just evergreen. And one of them was precisely that, which is a list of 10 things that require zero talent that essentially will put you ahead of 90% of people. And it was being on time, work ethic, effort, body language, energy, attitude, passion, being coachable, doing extra, and being prepared, right? Nowhere in there is subject matter expertise or being a world-class expert or anything like that. Like, a lot of that stuff is learnable on the job, but it's this list of things. Like, I tell everybody that. It's really cool that you do as well. Like, if you can just do that, you legitimately are ahead of minimum 90% of people. It's probably, if we're honest with ourselves, it's probably 95 to 98%. Like, that's how low the bar is. So yeah, it's just like a kind of a cool little aside here for another aspect of FI.
I couldn't agree with you more. Talk to anyone who's in charge of hiring, and they will give you this perspective of like, wow, it's so hard to find people who just show up consistently every day and do what they're supposed to do. That's it.
Yeah, it's crazy. It is absolutely crazy. All right, you guys have reached what you're calling your early retirement era from a really cool graphic that you have on your site. So the last time we spoke with you, it looks like you were just about reaching that early retirement era.
Yeah.
So how did the national park trip play into that? Was that like the transition into, like, fill us in? Because yeah, the last we heard from you it was essentially June of 2020 that we published that episode.
So interestingly, Stephen kind of alluded, I didn't take any kind of remote work with my employer. So I ended up just quitting that job, which was at the end of 2018, right before we took our national parks trip in 2019.
So Lauren effectively retired at the end of 2018.
Yeah, I have not worked a full-time job since then. So
damn. Okay. Nice.
For me, as I mentioned, I worked out a part-time freelance deal with my existing employer for that national parks trip. That worked out really well. I worked maybe like 10 hours a week or so while we were on the road, made pretty good money doing that. Actually, made more per hour than I did as a full-time employee, which was kind of crazy. Less overall, but more per hour. And then I came back from that trip and I said, you know what? I like my job. I mean, I'm going to give it a go again with the full-time work thing. And yeah, I lasted about 6 months in that before I realized I don't know if I want to do full-time employee work anymore. And at that point, I kind of called myself retired in 2020, right before turning 30.
Wow. So, okay, right before turning 30. That's amazing. So, is your story, if you had to encapsulate it, obviously there's so many layers, but is one of the driving forces just the fact that you learned how to live very inexpensively? Is that like one of the bedrock principles?
The single most important contributor to our financial success was learning to live happily on dramatically less money than our peers.
Yeah, I would say the moment that we kind of noticed that was right after college graduation. We had moved to California for Stephen to go to grad school, and he was bringing in a stipend of like, I don't know, was
I
it like
think
20
about
or something?
$22,000 a year.
Okay.
And I took a full-time job as a receptionist, so like I wasn't really making super great money, but for us to be both bringing in real incomes now, low but real, consistent. We were just out of college. We were now living on another campus now for Stephen to go to grad school, and we were just saving a lot of money, like incidentally. Like money was piling up in our accounts because we were just still living that like college lifestyle of, I think we literally moved all of our old college furniture to this new place. Like we were just doing the same thing of what was fine 2 months ago for us. And even now we're like in this new place. It was easy to just keep living the way that we love to live. I mean, we would go on bike rides down to the beach, like we would do fun stuff, and it just wasn't costing us. And that's actually how we got into investing, is because we had all this money kind of piling up in our accounts, and we were like, what do we do with this? Like, I don't need to really spend it. Like, I'm pretty happy as is. Is there something else we could do with this money? And that's kind of how we discovered investing and all that.
Yeah, it really, from the beginning, it was just we lived frugally. We lived, like Lauren said, kind of like college students because we were straight out of college. And so we never really had to try super hard to save money. We were just sort of naturally that way. And when we got jobs, it was like, oh, this money's just starting to pile up here. Like, what do we do with this? And yeah, started down the investing path. And importantly, did not increase our expenses from there significantly for a really long time. And even still to this day, our expenses are pretty low compared to American middle class, I guess.
Yeah, I definitely want to talk about your investment strategy, and we can get to what your expenses are now. But just real quick, what do you think it was about you two that you were okay spending less than all your friends and peers? Because you take it as a given, like that's like, okay, this was our decision. It was just like very obvious. And it's funny because I live the same way in my own head. It's like, hey, this is clear cut. This is how I'm doing it. But it's not so clear cut, right? Like, let's be straight. Like, most of your friends needed to prove how adult they were, right? So they got fancy cars, or I'm thinking back to myself, right? Like fancy cars, or they needed to live in an apartment by themselves. Like, how did you guys not succumb to any type of lifestyle inflation when you're 22, 23 years old? And with the stipend and Lauren's salary, you're making, I don't know, somewhere around 50 grand, I would imagine, somewhere 40 to 50 grand. How do you not succumb to that?
Honestly, I think it was kind of a bunch of factors combined. I mean, one thing about both of us is that we legitimately just enjoy stuff that doesn't cost a lot of money. I mean, we're both like pretty outdoorsy. We like going on bike rides and hikes and stuff like that. Neither one of us has ever been like a big drinker, which just kind of automatically saves you a lot of money incidentally. And then for sure, once we actually discovered the idea of like investing, turning your money into more money, financial independence, early retirement, that was definitely a motivator to go like even harder with it, to say like, hey, there's actually a point to all the extra money that you accumulate, right? Because it's one thing to incidentally be piling up money. It's another thing to have a purpose for that money and to say, wow, if we accumulate enough of this, we can be free from mandatory work for the rest of our lives. That's pretty crazy. And so that led us to do things like, keep from buying a brand new car, which is like a default thing to do, right? Why would you do that when you're already happy with the level of car that's $5,000 or less or something like that? That was definitely a huge motivator.
Yeah, and I would say for me, I mean, I come from like a much more frugal background to begin with. I mean, I paid my own way through college. I had a partial scholarship and then, waited tables and worked in my field to cover the rest. And so I think I was just kind of used to kind of taking care of myself in some respects and knowing that, I needed to have the money available for emergencies. I mean, I remember being in college and being like, all right, if I were to break my arm or something, how would I deal with that? And like, I needed to have some savings, and I don't know that a lot of people are thinking like worst case scenarios, but I do think sometimes it helps to visualize like, all right, what would happen if, for good and bad things. I think like kind of that visualization exercise is important. And so, yeah, I would say that it was kind of just natural. We had been living together and keeping our expenses low. We were like in 1-bedroom apartments up until we bought our first home. Just again, to kind of save money, it was cheaper that way. We shared one car. It was cheaper that way too.
Yeah, Lauren was definitely like frugal by necessity for a little while before we kind of teamed up financially. So I think it was really natural for her.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I love, Lauren, how you said until we bought our first home, as if it was this crazy purchase. But if I recollect right, it was a $71,000 house in Gainesville, Florida, right?
Yes, but it seemed. I mean, it was crazy. I feel like
that was half our money.
It was half of our available funds.
Did you buy it in cash?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah. So it was really weird to like have this check that was written. I think the bank wrote it, right? It was like a whole, and I was like, that's the biggest check I've ever seen. And yeah, I mean, that was our home. It was a 3-2 condo in Gainesville, and that was our home for 5 or 6 years. And that's also the place we rented out when we went on our national parks trip. And then later when we bought the home that we're in now, we have rented that place out since then. So
yeah, we still have it as our only rental property, which we don't really have any intention of getting any deeper into real estate investing. It's just like a little too much effort, too high effort for us. But we got that one property and it's done really well for us.
Nice. Yeah, I'm in the same boat. It sounds good in theory, but it's just a little too many touch points for my my liking. But yeah, that's $71,000 purchase price. I can imagine I don't know what your rental income is per month, but I would imagine it's somewhere in the vicinity of that 1% or thereabouts, right?
Yeah, so the place right now rents for $1,780 a month. We have an awesome tenant who's never missed a payment and has been with us for 3 or 4 3 years now.
This is like the fourth year, I think.
I think we're in the 4th year. And on top of that, the place is worth probably $150,000 to $160,000 now, and our maintenance costs have been really low on it. So seriously, we've done really well with that investment. But even still, I know that a lot of that's good luck, and so we don't want to go deeper and deeper into the real estate thing. I think it just kind of accumulates little burdens on you as you go. So we're happy with the one rental property.
Yeah, and our approach with that was also just like, we bought that place with the intention of if we ever needed to get rid of it, it's probably would be easy to offload, because whether it's rent it out or selling it, it wasn't like our specific dream home. It was like a good rate, good number, good size in a good area. I mean, it's 2 miles from the University of Florida campus and like 3 miles from downtown. So like it was pretty well positioned to become a rental property if we wanted it to. And we figured if we needed to, we would dip our toes into that. But yeah, after having our toes in there for the last few years, I'm good.
We'll keep the toes in, not get any deeper. I like it. So, Stephen, you said a couple of minutes ago, there's a point to all the money we're accumulating. And I think this really is one of those aha moments for people when they find FI is it's not just, even for people like us, the three of us, it sounds like are natural savers. We're pretty fortunate, but similar to you guys at the beginning, before I found FI, it was just, all right, I'm saving this money just for the sheer hell of it, in essence. Like there was no North Star. And I think having that 4% rule, or 4% rule of thumb, as we call it, because, we're not going to get into the arguments of, is it 3.25%? Is it, because it doesn't matter, right? Like it gives you that North Star for something to shoot for. And there's a point, like you said, to that money you're accumulating. And I think that's critical. But in order for that money to grow and compound, there has to be some type of investment strategy, right? So you clearly weren't just sitting with this under your mattress somewhere, though I guess you did eventually plunk down half your money on this incredible investment in the real estate in Gainesville. But kind of jokes aside, what is your investment strategy? Is it the typical kind of FI index fund? Is that the overarching principle? Or talk me through what you guys do with your money.
Yeah, I mean, just to bounce off what you were saying there with the 4% as like a North Star, but not necessarily like it doesn't really matter. Is it 3 or 4 or 5% or whatever? So true. I mean, I will just mention right now, we've never drawn down our portfolio, even after being like quote unquote retired for the last 4 years or so and doing all these vacations and stuff. You kind of find that like you lose sight of a specific money goal over time because you learn that if you're frugal and if you're good at making money in creative ways that are fun and don't take a lot of work input, the 4% rule starts to not matter pretty soon for most people, I think. But regarding our investment portfolio, I mean, we have our primary residence we're sitting in right now. We live next to the beach now just because that's where we want to live, not tied down to any specific place for a job anymore, anything like that. We paid cash for this place as well. We have that rental property that we talked about. And then, yeah, really the rest of our net worth is pretty much invested in just broad stock and bond market index funds. So VTI, VXUS, and BND are the big ones in the portfolio.
Gotcha. Yeah, those are certainly ticker symbols that a lot of people will recognize here clearly. And I think it's cool that you mentioned VTI because I think in the FI community, VTSAX almost became like a meme on some levels. Like it was VTSAX or nothing. And I think what we're trying to get across, and obviously we talked about VTSAX hundreds of times on Choose FI, so we're partially culpable here, but is that VTI is just the ETF version of VTSAX. And I think a lot of people, so because again, VTSAX is this meme. So people open up an account at Fidelity or Schwab and they're like, oh, I have to get VTSAX. And then they wind up getting hit with this crazy fee to buy it there, which is like the exact opposite of what I want people to do. And the cool thing is VTI is essentially the exact same thing. And you can purchase it at Vanguard, obviously, Fidelity, Schwab, et cetera. And you should pay, at least at those three brokerage houses, a $0 commission. So this is kind of a PSA to everybody listening, obviously not to you guys because you know this already, but it's so important. And I'm trying to get VTI to kind of take over here instead of VTSAX just because there's so much more flexibility.
Yeah, honestly, I think that's great advice. ETFs in general are a little more flexible and trade freely at more brokerages than mutual funds do. But really, I mean, I would go even a step further than what you said. There's probably 20 mutual funds and ETFs that are virtually identical in every way to VTSAX. So just buy one that doesn't have a commission at your brokerage and that has ultra low fees and the same holdings, and you're buying the same thing.
Wholeheartedly agreed. And yeah, so everyone should look when they make a purchase. Are there commissions or just some unexplained fee that you just have never seen before? I had somebody write me an email that said they got hit with a $75 fee every single time they invested, again, in VTSAX at another brokerage house. And they were only investing like $150 like weekly. So it was literally 50% of the money they were putting in. So luckily they were able to rectify that pretty quickly. But yeah, look for that. And like you said, the other fee is that expense ratio. So that you will not see that like when you check out to purchase, but that's more on the detail page for that particular fund or ETF in that case.
Yeah. And I mean, not to get us too deep in the weeds here, but I think this is a useful tip for people who may be listening and kind of like not knowing what we're talking about or just picking one of these out of a hat. Another thing to look out for is if you are investing small dollar amounts, like you said, if someone's investing $50 or $100 a week or something like that, and they're doing it in smaller amounts, you might look at the share price of these funds and be a little scared. I think VTI is trading around like $250 a share right now. Some brokerages will let you split that into partial shares. Some won't. And so if you do feel the need to invest in smaller dollar amounts, there's multiple ways to do that. You can go to a brokerage that offers partial shares of ETFs, or you can buy the mutual fund version that's free to buy, commission free to buy at your brokerage. And you can denominate that in dollars instead of shares, and they will split it up for you. So there's a lot of options. And it's like you said, really the bottom line here is make sure you're not paying a commission. There's a way to do it without it, no matter what your situation is.
Yep. Love that. Absolutely love it. And right. The kind of last word on that is just try to stay away from buying another brokerage firm's mutual fund at this other brokerage house. I think that's kind of like one of those, just like, if you remember nothing else, just remember that because almost invariably there's going to be a significant fee from that. So yeah, I know there was kind of like a little sidebar, but that was so important because I think people really crave this like precise information. So you guys do that. You said BND, and what was the third one?
VXUS, which is a total international stock market index fund. So it's like the international version, sort of VTI.
Gotcha. So total international, total bond market. Do you have like a general split? Like, how do you think about it in terms of like a holistic portfolio? Maybe new money that goes in? Is it to like kind of rebalance to get to a certain amount? Does it just go in certain X percentage? How do you think about that?
Yeah, to be honest with you, best practice is to decide on an asset allocation that is based on your risk tolerance. So decide on a stock and bond split and a certain amount of cash that you want to hold maybe in a savings account based on your personal risk tolerance. And no one can tell you what's right for that except for you. It needs to be based on the amount of risk you want to take. Stocks are going to be riskier than bonds when we're talking about whole market funds like this, right? So you got to decide on that split for yourself and then keep consistent with that no matter what the market is doing, because you chose it for a reason, and it's because it's the amount of risk that you are comfortable with. Now, as for us, are we really careful about keeping our asset allocation the exact percentage that we decided on? No, not really. We like to keep, I don't know, somewhere between like 60 to 80% of our funds in risky assets like stock market index funds and real estate, and then the rest in like bonds and cash in a high yield savings account. That's what makes us feel safe. We should probably nail down exact numbers that we're sticking to, but the rebalancing that we do isn't like a careful once per year thing. It's exactly what you said. We sweep just extra money from, side hustles and part-time freelance work and our rent that comes in from our condo, all those sources. We sweep all that extra money into whichever asset bucket seems like it's kind of getting out of balance, out of whack with the rest, and we let them be approximately what we've set out. Also, I wanted to note that like in terms of deciding how much money to invest, because I think for a lot of people who are in the accumulation phase, who are still like pre-fi, that's a big question, right? Like how much money should I be investing? We had kind of a unique strategy, I think, for that along the way too. So we called it the sweep away method. And also we've called it pay yourself last, which is kind of the opposite of pay yourself first. So a lot of people say you should decide on an amount you want to invest to meet your goals, and then make sure you invest that amount each month or each week or however often it is. And then, you can do what you want with the rest. And this is supposed to make you feel like freer in some way. As we mentioned before, we kind of came from like a naturally frugal place where we really had no desire to like spend more money. That just like wasn't a goal of ours that's on the list, right? So we were always spending automatically way less than we needed to live during our accumulation phase. So our strategy was spend as little as we need to be happy, and then sweep 100% of the excess, whatever number that may be happy with that, into, first high yield savings account for an emergency fund, then pay off all your debt, which we didn't have any, and then the rest into those investments. So letting your spending dictate how much you save rather than the other way around, which is more often recommended, right? But that really only works if you have a good handle on your spending in the first place.
Yeah, I was going to add that the mindset is really key there. For us, we really bought into the idea that this saving was important and that the dollars that we weren't, buying a new car with was going somewhere else more valuable to us, which was investing for our future, that meant something. I think that that's really important. And you do have to buy into that idea that it's worth it, because otherwise, you're going to be tempted to like spend more money. But I think if you find out that you don't need to spend more money to be happy, it's easier. And it might be a harder process to start with, but I feel like it's really necessary to get your mindset right for doing so much saving.
There also turned out to be a huge mathematical benefit in the long run for us because of our mindset, because we realized that we didn't need to spend more money to be happy. Pay yourself last actually made us way richer than pay yourself first would have. And the reason why is because if we had decided early on, let's say we had been really aggressive in the eyes of like most people and said, we're going to save 50% of our income, right? And we're going to make sure we save 50% before we spend $1, and then we'll spend the rest carefree. We would have retired or reached financial independence dramatically later than we actually did, because by doing pay yourself last, we actually realized, oh, we really only need to spend like 20% of our income to be happy, especially when we reach those higher paying jobs. At one point, we were saving as much as 90% for a brief period. And we never would have done that if we were paying ourselves first. We would have just saved our 50%, patted ourselves on the back, moved on with our day, and we would have less money today as a result.
Yeah, that's remarkable. It is amazing how the psychology works on all of this, right? And I think, like Lauren said, it's going somewhere more valuable and it's worth it. And I think that was your guiding light here. And it's funny because I think very similarly to you guys. My whole MO when it comes to money is I have 100% savings rate, and then there's some necessary spending, and then all the rest of it just gets swept into investments.
Exactly.
So it's working. It's, I guess you guys call it these other ways, the sweep away method, pay yourself last. Like that is exactly how I've always worked. I just think about it as, for some weird reason, it's always been I have 100% savings rate. I spend some money, whatever's left, that's my savings rate. But to your point, I think again with the psychology being so important, right? So I think for a lot of people who maybe don't have the natural inclination to save, like I talked to somebody who was in college, actually at the economy conference that I just went to. And I basically said, you're guaranteed essentially to succeed in life. Like barring a zombie apocalypse, you're guaranteed if when you get out of college, you save 50% of your income, put it in low cost ETFs, and then you can spend every other dollar and gleefully do it. And I think for most people, that's going to be the right advice. But in your case, like you said, that would have actually lowered your savings rate had you done it that way, because you would have felt, oh, I have all this money, I'm supposed to spend it. And in your case, you had the 80-90% savings rate at some point.
Yeah, everything you said is true. And also, you can do better if you want to.
Right, if you want to. Exactly.
It's important to note, too, that for us, it was also encouraging because our spending was low and we knew that we were likely to keep it fairly low over time. That also lowered that goal that we had to reach. You know, a lot of people set this really huge, way beyond their 4% rule of thumb spending just because they want to, or they think that they need that, or that they want to spend that much. But if you do have low spending, it lowers that goal and you can start making these drastic choices sooner. I mean, it's kind of a double-edged sword in a way, having that lower spending is you get to save more, and that goal that you're saving toward doesn't have to be so high, and you can start feeling freer sooner. And that's really what happened to us those early years when we had 7 years of our expenses saved up in just 2 years. And that's what led us to be able to feel comfortable piecing off to Hawaii for 6 months. Like that was really part of it for us. And I would say another huge part of the mindset was tracking our net worth. We tracked our net worth every single month, and it felt like a game. We were like, oh, how much did we save this month? How much closer are we to our goal this month? When Stephen was like setting up the spreadsheet for us, I was like, I kind of want it to be like those fundraiser thermometers where we're like filling it in over time and we see it growing. And he was like, all right, I can do a bar graph. And I was like, okay, fine. But we seeing that progress and knowing, you know, we're working on this together. It's you and me both accomplishing, chipping away at this goal, and then going and doing something fun to celebrate when we need to was really important, I think, to the mindset. That Hawaii trip was like total proof of concept that retirement, like early retirement, would work. I feel like.
And that you don't have to wait until you are fully retired and financially independent to have fun. It should be fun the whole time, or else you're doing it wrong, right? You should be spending an amount of money that you need to spend to be happy and live a fun life. It just turns out that number is a lot lower than most people think it is.
Man, that's a quote for the ages. It should be fun the whole time, or you're doing it wrong. And that's like emblazon that on t-shirts or something, right? For the FI community. Because really so many people sadly think this is a life of deprivation, or, oh, I'm saving, I'm putting off for another day. And like you guys are arguing the exact opposite, which is you can build this remarkable life that doesn't cost that much. And that affords you the flexibility to do all these incredible things. And I mean, again, going back to this graph of the early retirement era, it looks like you guys hit a remarkable milestone in 2023 at some point in terms of net worth. And I guess the cool thing is this is not just a one-way journey, right? Like you can, like we're talking about, it's about flexibility. It's about enjoying your life. It's about experimenting. It's about travel and whatever it may be. And sometimes that also means, hey, I have the flexibility to unretire, if you will. And that's maybe the season of life you're in right now, but it's also, it can be for a short time. It doesn't have to be forever. You can succeed wildly with your net worth, with lowering your expenses, with buying 2 houses in cash, and still go back to work because you want to on your terms. And Stephen, it sounds like that's where you guys are now.
Yeah. So to be clear, we've been effectively on vacation for like 4 straight years now in our quote unquote early retirement era. But recently, last summer, a friend and former coworker of mine, and actually now current coworker of mine, kind of on a beach walk at our house here, he convinced us, he hyped us up that this business idea that we had been talking about for a long time was a really good idea and we should give it a shot. And so we just pulled the trigger and we did it. And so, we've both been working on it. Lauren has maintained a little bit more of her retirement than I have. I've been like pretty full time working for myself for the last, I don't know, 7 or 8 months now. But like you said, it has been on my own terms and it's been a project that I wanted to do. And I feel like, wow, like this is a dream I get to pursue now. And I get to start this business and say to myself, if the business is a complete failure, which let's be real, a lot of new businesses end up failing. I mean, that's just facts of life. That's okay. It doesn't matter. I don't need the money to live at this point in my life. And so you get to do things in early retirement, in financial independence that other people have to do just clenching their teeth with stress about, right? Like starting a business. And it's given us a lot of flexibility in setting up the business in exactly the way that we want it to. So I like to say that in this business, we are only swinging at pitches that we want to hit. Whereas a lot of times when you're starting to do a business, it's like you're chasing every dollar that you can possibly chase because you have to become profitable. You have to pay your bills. And so it's been really cool unretiring for a period of time now with this new lease on like what is work, what is business. And again, that background, that cushion of money that we built up just kind of the old fashioned way, that's what made this all possible.
Yeah, I don't think we would have been as comfortable taking the risk of entrepreneurship so fully if we were still like dependent on that income. I mean, we just worked our regular jobs to save the money that we've saved so far. And I do think that that has given us a much calmer approach to entrepreneurship. It feels a lot less risky. And as Stephen put it, yeah, we can like pick and choose the things that we want to do. It's also allowed us to approach the business from this perspective of how do we make it not be a job for us in the future? How do we set this up to become a passive income stream so that when we are tired of doing this or we do want to take a break, we can do it? Because a lot of times when you're a small business owner, you don't get the luxury of taking, a month off or 2 months off or 6 months off.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was talking about when I was talking about swinging at the pitches we want to hit. We're going after marketing strategies that can become automated over time. And if they don't work, that's fine. It is what it is. But if they do work, they set us up for like a turnkey type of business that just runs itself. And so there's basically like an end in sight for the period of extreme work. This is also a business where we have to build up a huge content library. So I'm like recording a ton of videos and making a bunch of study guides as a college tutoring platform. And so all of that work can be front loaded. And once it's done, it's done. So we're setting ourselves up for like a fully automated business, and we're not paying any attention to what we can do in the meantime to like ring the cash register. We don't really care. We don't really need the money in the meantime.
Yeah, I love the concept of fat pitches. It reminds me of Mr. Buffett and Munger, right? Where essentially they sit and read all day and people come to them with pitches all the time. And I think most of it just ends up in the quote, too hard pile, right? And okay, we don't have to swing at every pitch. Like you're saying, most small business owners, especially at the beginning, they're working themselves ragged, right? They're working 80 hours a week, trying to scrimp and save every penny, but also just eke out every single penny. And you're starting from a completely different, really starting point of, as I say it, like if money wasn't a factor, what would I do? And that enabled you to make this choice to even go into the business in the first place.
Yeah, I highly recommend retire first, then start a business. It's a totally different ballgame.
That's great. That's really great. Any like high level overview of like what is the business? Obviously we're not. You've gone out of your way not to talk about it, so you're not hawking it in any way. But like, what's it all about?
Hey, I'll take any opportunity I can to talk about it. The business is called Crambetter. It's crambetter.com. It's a college tutoring platform. So basically, we give study guides that you fill in as you watch videos about topics like physics, chemistry, calculus, all those like hard math and science classes. And so we're helping students at different colleges and universities just prepare for their exams and get better grades in less time. We're trying to be like the short and sweet, young and hip tutors that crack jokes and stuff and make these subjects not completely miserable to learn.
Yeah, at like larger universities, right? These classes are typically huge lecture halls, 200, 500 students in a single classroom. And it's really hard to learn that way. I mean, that was my experience. When I was in college, I had to drop calculus, and I think I got a pretty low grade in chemistry, and then I switched majors. But it's hard. I mean, even when you're a good student and even when you want to do well, sometimes it's really hard because those big auditoriums just aren't conducive to the kind of learning that sometimes you need for those subjects.
That's very cool. Stephen, we're going to test my memory here. I know you were a tutor in the past, and I think you were going for like a PhD in particle physics or some such. So you obviously have like a pretty significant math background. So this seems like a natural for you.
Yeah, my background's all in physics. I was doing a PhD in particle physics, and then I ended up becoming a high school teacher in physics and then a private tutor for university level physics for many years.
That's very cool. Yeah, so I like this. So it's cram better essentially for very specific college courses. So this is not like every college course that exists. It sounds very math and science oriented and very specific, right?
Yeah, it's like Lauren pointed out, we're targeting those classes that are traditionally the hardest for students, weed out classes for like pre-med
right, like organic chemistry or something like that, I'm thinking.
Yeah, exactly. So pre-med students and engineering students mainly. And we're targeting those ones that are traditionally taught in like a mega auditorium setting where you have the hardest time learning or getting any kind of individual attention. So using Crambetter feels a little bit more like having a private tutor, but at a level that's way more affordable. It's only $40 per month, whereas private tutors, I mean, an entry-level private tutor would cost you $40 for an hour of time, and some of them are $200 an hour.
Yeah, and don't ask Stephen what his rate was when he was
That's awesome.
Not super affordable.
Yeah, and I love how there's an end to this, right? Like it is really a season and it's this mini unretirement. It's not, hey, I'm doing this forever. I'm going to work 40-hour weeks for the next 10 years when I'm already fi. Though that's fine, frankly, if you went in with eyes wide open, right? And this is not the anti-work show or community by any means.
No, my perspective on this business has been that it's an opportunity to take a lifetime of learning that I've done about how to be a good physics tutor and do my very best work that I've ever done for one like really hard year while I'm building up the content library for this business. Once that part is over, it's mostly just marketing and like curation of those materials for people. And so the business is like, it's this 1 year of unretirement, this mini unretirement. And then from then on out, theoretically, it should be a pretty passive income stream and just like a fun little side project to do during our retirement.
Yeah, guys, this is really great. What a wonderful episode. It's great to catch up with both of you. It's so neat to see this entire journey and to see how really the 5 principles have been a through line throughout your entire, fairly abbreviated. We're talking 10 or 11 years at this point, maybe 12 at the absolute most. And here you are. And yeah, your story just has a little bit of everything. So super cool. Lauren, so we mentioned Crambetter. Is it, so fill in the blanks, the exact URL, and then where else can people reach you?
Yeah, so the new business is crambetter.com. And then to check out all of our financial details, all of our travel hacks, travel tips, our asset portfolio, all that good stuff is on our blog, tripovalifestyle.com. And you can also follow us at tripovalifestyle on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube. I mean, we're on all the platforms.
Very cool. All right. Thank you again for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us.